Okay, we'll start. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to all of our attendees, and thanks very much for taking the time to come to this seminar organised by the OU's Gender Critical Research Network. I'm Jessica Evans from the Sociology Department, and I'm really delighted to introduce our distinguished speaker today, Philip Stokoe, who I'll come to in a minute. Before we begin the seminar, though, I just wanted to flag up our forthcoming event, which is in 2 weeks' time, May the 14th, 2 o'clock, where Lisa Marciano, who's a Jungian psychoanalyst and author, as well as contributor to the Depth Psychology podcast called This Jungian Life, will be coming to present a paper called A Case Presentation of Desistance. And you can register by the usual means through our website or email us. Now, for those of you who are at the OU, just to say that we, the GCRN, are holding regular drop-in sessions so that you can find out more about the work we're doing and to help us develop plans for the future. And we've also set up a reading group. So if you're OU staff, please contact us if you're interested in either of those. Now, we set up the Gender Critical Research Network for thoughtful, respectful and robust academic debate on questions and concepts of sex and gender. Disagreements are, of course, hugely welcome, but anyone using hostile, degrading or insulting language won't be allowed to stay in the seminar. The nature of our topic does necessitate sex-based language, such as male and female, but please be mindful of the sensitive nature of the topics under discussion and help us to maintain an open and respectful academic space. As John said, we're recording this webinar, so turn off your camera if you don't want to be on YouTube, where we will put the webinar soon after today. We've also turned the chat function off so that we can emulate as best as possible the face-to-face experience of everyone's full attention in the room together. And we've also turned off your mics for the moment. I'd like to introduce Philip Stokoe, who is a psychoanalyst in private practice working with adults and couples, and he's a member of the Institute of Psychoanalysis. He's also an organisational consultant to a wide range of organisations. He worked in the adult department of the Tavistock and Portsmouth NHS Foundation Trust between 1994 and 2012, and was appointed clinical director in 2007. His book, which came out in 2020, called The Curiosity Drive, Our Need for Inquisitive Thinking, is a really powerful, I really recommend it. It powerfully illuminates how the growth of the mind is at the core of the psychoanalytic task, and the crucial role that curiosity and an openness to new experiences and being altered by them plays in mental development. Now, Philip's going to speak for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll open up for comments and questions. Phil's paper is called The Crucial Difference Between Psychoanalytic Identity and Gender Identity. I'm delighted, Philip, to hear your paper. Over to you.
Thanks, Jess. I'm very honoured to be invited to address you. I'm also very conscious that Jo Phoenix was part of the group which set up this network and was treated appallingly by this university for doing this and for her beliefs that are represented here. I salute her courage and victory over people who claimed to represent academia and yet throw away the central tenet of the academic world to provide a safe place for discussion in favour of a fundamentalist certainty that perceives disagreement as an unacceptable assault that must be silenced. I hope that my brief paper will serve to address this phenomenon to some extent. Psychoanalysis, both the scientific study of the mind and the therapy, which I think of as an art, rests upon an assumption that is rarely made clear, namely that human beings are always changing, that life itself is about constant change. In other words, the psychoanalytic study of the mind and of individuals is the study of processes, not static, closed systems. What was explicit from the first writings of Freud is that we differ from other animals in being able to choose to face reality. and this capacity stimulates the development of the conscious mind. I will describe how this happens and then discuss the detrimental consequences which can lead to a total resistance to change, growth, or development. This has at its center the establishment of unconscious beliefs. The conscious representation of unconscious beliefs is the evidence that we are in the grip of one, the representation, the evidence that we're in the grip of one is that we behave as if we or a part of us is fixed, immutable, unchangeable, certain. It's my contention that the current expression of gender identity is exactly such a phenomenon. Where process gives way to certainty, no growth or development is possible. Let's begin with a statement that might seem so fundamental that it needs no mention. I shall proceed, nevertheless, because the world in which identity politics has taken such a firm grip is one in which it is wise to begin by distinguishing testable facts from beliefs. The statement is that human beings are animals. We are intimately linked to life on this planet, and most of our DNA is shared with all animals. On the other hand, it is instantly clear that we differ from other animals. The question is, can there be a generally accepted view of how we differ? Not so long ago, this difference was defined in the Western world anyway, in terms of a belief-based idea. The claim was that humans have souls, but animals do not. My proposition is that the difference is the development of a conscious, cognitive, that is, self-reflective mind that provides the capacity for thought. Further, that this mind develops from a hardwired drive, forcing us to explain to ourselves what's happening to us. Also, that these explanations can only arise from what we already know. We shall come back to this later, and indeed it will turn out to be fundamental to the argument I shall be developing. There's already an implication for human psychological life in those two statements about our explanations to ourselves, which is that if we are always driven to explain what's happening, we are by nature open to changing a previous explanation in the light of new experience or new information. It may be apparent that in this short journey triggered by the question of how we differ from other animals, we are already describing our minds. At this point, it's important to make another statement about the way the mind functions in all animals. Our mind is stimulated by feelings. Feelings are the mechanism of internal conversation between what is going on below the surface and our consciousness. And the task of our mind is to process those feelings. We aren't aware of all the activity or of the physiology of our stomachs, but at a certain point, triggered by that activity, we have a familiar feeling that we call hunger. This was Freud's first observation, and he recognized that feelings are generated in this space below consciousness, not only by physiological states, but by psychological states. For example, fear is not simply a response to a completely internal physiological state. It can be the expression of the unconscious reaction to certain external stimuli. Freud proposed that these feelings are experienced as drives, and all animal behavior can be understood as a response to them. He considered this to be a fundamental concept in psychoanalytic theory. The stimulation of a drive is experienced as a feeling, but for animals and babies, these feelings are raw and therefore extremely intense. So intense that the animal is forced to act to find something that will satiate the drive and relieve the intense feeling. He called the raw feeling unpleasure, and the desperation to get rid of it was the pleasure principle. You could say that the reaction to feelings, to get rid of them, means that the animal is organized around a wish to achieve a state of rest or stasis. Freud's view was that the difference between us and other animals was our capacity to turn to face reality. He called this the move from the pleasure principle to the reality principle. This capacity leads us to develop a conscious cognitive mind. Interestingly, he did not give a clear explanation as to what it is that all human infants do where no other animal does. I've written about this more fully elsewhere, and Jess was kind enough to refer to my book, The Curiosity Drive. She was also able to comment on this, sorry about that, the subtitle, which I can never remember. Anyway, I'll leave that. So I hope you'll forgive me for giving a rather schematic description here. If we think that Freud's pleasure principle makes sense, both of the animal behavior and of the newborn child, it means that it's the intensity of the feeling that forces us to act, to get rid of it. So we should ask ourselves, has something happened to this intensity for the child that doesn't happen for the animal? We don't have to look far. The psychoanalyst Melanie Klein and her followers identified a phenomenon in her child patients that she called primitive defenses. She meant internal psychic structures that protect our minds from being overwhelmed. This threat, so far as I've discovered it, is always some sort of feeling and is usually experienced as anxiety because of its intensity. I suggest that the very first defenses are quite simply, and yet crucially, the mechanism for turning down the volume of feelings. And this is the eureka moment, because as soon as we have a way to reduce the intensity of feelings, we have the chance to do something other than to act in the face of the activation of a drive. It provides us with a psychic space, and it is within this psychic space that we develop symbolization, the basis for thinking, enabling us to transform feeling into meaningful information. All that remains is to see if we can discover the single thing that enables us to develop these defenses. A psychoanalyst called Wilfred Bion gave it to us. His concept of the main drives, and these are component drives, these are made up of sub-drives, as it were love, hate, and K, the urge to know. I prefer the term curiosity because it describes a feeling like love and hate. Bion said that there had to be a thing that caused the infant to choose to face reality. And that thing, like love and hate, had to be intrinsic to the human mind. So he suggested K, and went on to propose the primitive expression of K, the basic and immutable activity, which he called alpha function, constantly transformed raw data into meaningful information. I prefer to say that our curiosity drive, physiologically embedded in our brains, requires us constantly to explain to ourselves what's happening to us. It is as if we have a deeply embedded computer program that requires us continually to answer the question, what's going on here? Since the information that stimulates the curiosity drive is always in the form of feelings, it's clear that feelings, and particularly labels previously attached to them, are never certain. They're always up for review. I would add something self-evidently axiomatic. Our explanations can only derive from what we already know. It's because babies only know a very few things that the earliest defensive systems appear in every culture across the planet. As soon as we see the elegance of this proposition for the development of the human mind, we also see that it works because it anticipates that we will constantly be redefining our experience, recreating our explanation for what's happening in the world. The accumulation of these explanations is what creates the conscious cognitive mind. And just to be clear what I mean by conscious, This is a mind that knows that it exists and has the capacity to recognize other minds and can locate itself in time and space reflectively. Be precise. I know that I exist. I have a sense of my history because I can access memories. I am able to anticipate the future through use of my memories and through symbolic functioning. I'm able to face reality, especially that I was conceived as a result of a sperm fertilizing an egg, that time passes and I shall eventually die. And really importantly, I cannot get through life on my own. I need help. All of this enables me to develop loving concern for others and therefore to form reciprocal relationships, to absorb information, transform it into symbols so that it can be thought about, which enables me to make decisions. All of this leads me to develop a sense of identity. I know who I am. One of the important qualities of this view of consciousness is thinking. Although I can't go into all the reasons for this here, I am saying that thinking is an achievement, not a given, and therefore it can be interfered with. In other words, I don't agree. I think, therefore I am. How our conscious thinking is interfered with will turn out to be crucial to the comparison of psychoanalytic identity and that of gender identity. In the terms that I've just described, this whole conscious system is, by definition, always in flux. Our ideas about the world and about ourselves in that world change as we constantly absorb more information and develop further explanations about this new information. Although this is going on all the time, there are periods when such changes are more apparent. We call those stages of development. The move from baby to toddler, the development that accompanies going to school, and most importantly for our discussion, the stage of development that we call adolescence. I shall come back to this, but I must pause to describe a basic defensive process that was vital in providing the infant with a beginning of a space to think instead of acting in response to an overwhelming feeling. Melanie Klein called this projective identification. Essentially, the baby imagines expelling the awful feeling into another and then identifying it as belonging to that other. Bion, who was a psychiatrist and knew how it felt to work on a psychiatric ward, claimed that this has an actual impact on the other. It is the underlying mechanism for how transference happens, and it is vital in psychodynamic therapy. It also operates unconsciously. Best example is bullying. Bullies, for a multitude of reasons, can't manage fear. If you watch a bully at work, the moment he sees the victim become frightened, he relaxes. He has succeeded in projecting his fear into somebody else and can identify it as belonging there. To all of this, I would add that it is impossible to exaggerate the impact that projective identification can have. I would give you an example, but I haven't time. You might say that the explanations we create in answer to the ongoing question, what's going on here, are beliefs. Where we consciously hold on to a belief, we understand that it is an idea without supportive evidence. In other words, the nagging impact of our curiosity drive makes us aware that this is an idea that we should seek to inquire into further. We certainly know it's not a fact. Unconscious beliefs, on the other hand, have a huge impact on the way that we see the world, but only enter consciousness in the form of apparent facts about the world or ourselves. Making unconscious beliefs conscious can allow us to see that we had taken something to be factually true that isn't. And this is the task of therapy. The psychoanalytic study of the mind has shown us that unconscious beliefs develop and are retained because they serve to protect us from having to know about something that otherwise would feel challenging or painful. You could say they are a way to deny reality. I'm going to talk about adolescence now. Medical science tells us that adolescence is brought about by biological changes, essentially triggered by the hypothalamus in the brain, leading to stimulation of the testes to secrete testosterone and the ovaries to secrete estrogen. Testosterone and estrogen in turn stimulate the development of primary and secondary sex characteristics and contribute to the spurt in the physical growth. Along with this, there is a radical change in the organization of the brain itself. The main point is these are all biological. We are aware of the physiological changes in the body that result from these biological processes. As with everything else that happens to us, these changes stimulate the curiosity drive, which requires us to answer the question, what's going on here? Two of the most important psychoanalytic writers in the field of adolescence, Moe and Egle-Laufer, describe this process as a task, specifically that the adolescent task is to take possession of the adult sexual body. Those of us who have worked with adolescents are aware that every adolescent, to some extent, has a negative emotional response to the physical changes in their body. In other words, all of us have had some level of body dysmorphia. In the past, adolescents would seek to understand what was happening to them by forming groups in which they felt safe to explore these questions. This is no longer the case, as I shall explain later. However, it is worth making the point here that the threat to normal adolescent development that used to worry those of us providing therapeutic help always took the form of organizations or individuals promising to provide simple answers to adolescent questions about their anxieties. These simple answers offered the same perspective, fundamentalism, a world of black and white in which there were only good and bad, us versus them. These truths are all examples of unconscious beliefs because they carry this penumbra of facts. At this point, I want to introduce another psychoanalytic idea. This arises from the observation of the development of infants. It is that there are primarily two states of mind. I would rather call them two beliefs about the world that we inhabit. The first accompanies the earliest pleasure principle stage of life, and the second develops along with the capacity to face reality. These states of mind, or views of the world, were first described by Melanie Klein, who called them respectively the paranoid schizoid position and the depressive position. There were good reasons for these rather intimidating names, but I'm offering other titles based on a different perspective, or, if you like, learning from experience. And I'm just going to now describe the qualities of these two views of the world. The first I call the fundamentalist view of the world. And this is ruled by the idea of the ideal, the omnipotent, the omniscient. And the governing principle is the pleasure principle that I've just described earlier. The central anxiety is survival, so massive, massive anxiety. And the language that accompanies this world is the language of blame. Essentially, if I'm not with the ideal, who's to blame? The preferred mental state is certainty. And the solutions in this world are all omnipotent, magical solutions, and they're always expressed as actions. The threat is always difference. And it comes as a shock to those people getting into therapy when they're dealing with somebody who's essentially operating from this state of mind, that when they offer help, they get attacked for it. Because, of course, help suggests that they're not ideal. They're not with the ideal. There's something not perfect about them. Equally, when you say to somebody, oh, well done, you're doing much better, again, you get attacked because you're suggesting that they're not ideal. And finally, relationships in this fundamentalist state of mind are either mergers, we all agree with each other, and therefore no problem, or we don't, in which case it's a sadomasochistic kind of relationship. Now, in comparison to that, the one that comes with facing reality, and I call it the reality-facing state of mind, is ruled not by the ideal, but by the ordinary. There are shades of gray. The governing principle is not the pleasure principle, but facing reality, the reality principle. The central anxiety is loss, because you discover as you move into this state of facing reality that you depend upon others to help you, and therefore losing the others is a threat. Language, the language of this state of mind is the language, I don't know quite how to describe it. Sometimes achievement seems to be the right way, but I think actually benign inquiry, small steps can be valued. The preferred mental state is thinking, which means tolerating uncertainty, and that stimulates curiosity. Solutions in this state of mind are doing the best you can. And threats are losses, and that's because we understand the facts of life that I described earlier. We can face psychic reality, we can acknowledge that we are needy, and difference is tolerated but also recognized as a source of creativity and hope. And therefore relationships are reciprocal. Creative intercourse based on the pleasure of discovering difference. Although there is a developmental journey that initially leads the infant from the fundamentalist to the reality-facing states of mind, we all, from that point on, move between these two states of mind continually throughout life. Faced by sufficient anxiety, we all of us move to a fundamentalist state of mind. Also, no decision can be made in the reality-facing state of mind. You could sit there for months seeing all sides of a question. When you make a decision, temporarily, you are a fundamentalist. You are doing the right thing. Hopefully, it's temporary, and then you move back into the reality-facing state of mind to see, was it the right kind of decision? We do this because of the operation of the curiosity drive. The process of learning from experience can be described in these terms. We come to an explanation for an experience. The next time something like this experience happens, our first reaction is to go to the original explanation. And this has now taken on a certain quality of certainty, which means we're now in the fundamentalist state of mind. So long as we're open to our curiosity drive, we can then move back to reality by assessing the situation and finding a new explanation for what's going on. So, to summarize the psychoanalytic view of identity, it originates biologically and embraces our animal condition. Our conscious cognitive mind, where thinking occurs, is the result of the continual activity of the curiosity drive. Our view of ourselves and the world we live in is constantly changing. Our human disposition is inquiry, and our preferred relationships involve the appreciation of difference. So our sense of our own identity is subject to these same changes in our understanding of the external and internal worlds. You might say identity is work in progress. So now I'm going to turn to gender identity, and I'm going to quote the great philosopher. I don't know whether he would have accepted that idea. I don't trust my inner feelings come and go. said Leonard Cohen. Now let's turn more briefly to the nature of identity offered by gender identity. I make no claims to being a philosopher in any academic sense, but my observation of the path of Western philosophy when it led to the postmodernist claim that nothing can be known for certain not only represents a serious cul-de-sac in philosophical thinking, but has enabled individuals to believe that whatever they may assert to be the case has equal validity to something that has been tested by experiment or discussion. The problem is that it coincided with a different sort of idea, this time a sociological concept, the rights of the individual. Although the American Declaration of Human Rights claimed, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with their Creator with a certain unalienable rights. Amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of those governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness." Yet, it was only when the Nuremberg trials, through the introduction of the concepts of crimes against humanity and genocide, actually confirmed that there really were individual rights that no state could ignore, that there was a legal backing to a growing social pressure in the Western world to recognize the rights of the individual. Now, this had already begun in the form of a particular development in capitalism, best represented by Henry Ford's stated aim to make the Model T Ford available to everyone. The development of public relations, a euphemism for the modern advertising industry, pushed the belief that everyone could aspire to every sort of material possession. In my view, all of these developments moved the notion of my rights higher up the political agenda in the Western world. Nonetheless, there were still parameters within which individual rights and ambitions were generally accepted to be constrained. One was social, the sense of a certain level of obligation to one's social group who reciprocally provided support and safety. And there is compelling evidence that this is essentially genetically built into our species. And this was most profoundly and beautifully illustrated, in my opinion, by the creation of the welfare state in the United Kingdom. The second was economic. Essentially, you might feel attracted to own a particular commodity, but you could face the reality, the constraining reality, of how much money you actually earned. However, all that was necessary for the next level of human rights was one which I would say is primacy of human rights, was to remove those parameters that encouraged this facing of reality. In the economic field, this was provided by Thatcher and Reagan, espousing neoliberal concept of the free market, based on completely false ideas about how human beings make decisions, amongst other things. And this led to a rush of entitlement. I am entitled to. So what happened to break down that social parameter of obligation to and respect for others? Well, perhaps I can explain my answer to this question by describing my own journey towards seeing the problem. My clinical concerns became acute in 2013 as a result of two areas in which I had professional involvement: the Tavistock Clinic, where I had been clinical director of the adult department until I resigned, and a range of supervisions and consultancies with professionals working with adolescents, many in higher education. In that second context, I had noticed that there was an extraordinary increase in the number of university students backed by very active parents, blaming that universities were damaging these young people's mental health. The outrage was massive, like a tsunami, and revealed two things that are now a recurrent pattern. The first was that in the face of a complaint, the majority of institutions of higher education abandoned debate and inquiry completely and accepted the criticisms and required changes. In other words, actions. And you know what I think about actions. It's a fundamentalist state. Specifically, the actions were to traditional teaching technique of challenging students' beliefs in order to develop capacities for thoughtful analysis. They did this on the grounds that such an approach was the cause and source of the apparent increase in mental disorder. And, which is worse, that the students were the arbiters and experts of what was acceptable and what should have no platform. In my supervision and consultancy role, it was blindingly clear to me that the experiences these young people were having had nothing to do with mental collapse. They were merely late onset adolescence. Of course, this raises the question, what had blocked the normal process? You will have guessed at the Tavistock Clinic phenomenon that raised my concern was the enormous increase in referrals of young women with apparent body dysmorphia and the extraordinary and completely non-psychoanalytic response to act rather than providing a space for thinking and inquiry. That was in the JIDS unit. To my mind, this revealed a disturbing pattern. In both contexts, there was a shrill complaint that arose from adolescents, their parents, and others who had no proper training or expertise in either mental health or human development, making the same general claim that these children were at risk of catastrophic emotional, psychological trauma unless action was taken straight away. It was clear that something unique was happening to the traditional process of adolescent development. This seemed to be a combination of parental overprotection and a social provision for a premature sight of individual adult identity. Clinical and personal experience made it clear where this was located: on the internet. No longer were developing children forming groups to help them explore the physiological changes they were experiencing. Their communications with their friends had moved to social media, in which ordinary conversations took the form of actions. For example, because you can see if your text has been read, any delay in reply is experienced as a communication which feels overwhelming because it is felt to be a rejection. Indeed, the descriptor of this experience was to misuse the term traumatizing. So it's a traumatizing experience that they're having. This was identical to the way that university students claimed that challenges to their beliefs about themselves and their view of the world was traumatizing trigger for a mental health crisis. It was as if the vast majority of adolescents had been recruited into exactly those belief systems that were always a threat in the past, only now appeared to be an infinite number of such psychic retreats. It only required a brief review of the places that these traumatized children retreated to, silos provided by the internet and offering instant and constant reinforcement for whatever identity any individual adolescent identified with, to understand what was happening. Essentially, initial answers to the question, what's going on here, found instant affirmation, and therefore transformed what should have been merely steps en route to a gradual exploration of adult identity into certainties. I said earlier that the ubiquitous process of projective identification would become crucial to our exploration. The adolescent I'm describing cannot manage the conflict between holding on to a secure sense of identity and the challenge of physiological and psychological change. The latter becomes experienced as a threat to their stability and is projected into any individual or system that would encourage inquiry, along with the label dangerous persecutor. The unconscious beliefs that hold these young people in thrall were summarized by Lukianoff and Hyde in their very helpful book, Coddling the American Mind, as the untruth of fragility. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. The untruth of emotional reasoning, the opposite of what Leonard Cohen says, always trust your feelings. And the untruth of us versus them, life is a battle between good people and evil people. I'm grateful to have discovered that view, that my view has been provided with some support from research data, all of which is referred to in their book. But I would add a fourth unconscious belief. Inquiry is an attack on my identity. This is tragic because the adult sexual identity always has the joy of the exploration of difference at its heart. This is where we can regain access to love and manage hate. Thank you for your kind attention. Oh, that's very kind of you.
Thank you, Philip. That was marvellous. It's a lot to think about. I think what we'll do is take anybody's thoughts. It doesn't have to be questions, it could be thoughts, comments. So if you'd like to put your hand up using the raise hand function, we'll collect a couple of comments or questions if you can keep it succinct, and then we'll ask Philip to engage with them. Donna, I think you were first with your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself?
How do I unmute myself? Oh, I've unmuted myself.
Yes, well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Stokoe. That was absolutely brilliant. Really enjoyed it. I'd like to ask you a really kind of basic question, really, just going back to ideas about drive and biological reality. And I was wondering if you could clarify for me the difference between an instinct and a drive. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Philip, is it okay if we just take a couple of comments and then you can cogitate? Was it Joe? Were you next?
Yes, I just wanted to not really ask a question, but just sort of shower praise and salutations for that that delivery. It's particularly interesting to hear concepts like the paranoid schizoid position and the depressive position, or in your terminology, which is perhaps more refined, you know, on this topic. You know, that was really enlightening. So it was just to say thank you rather than to ask any questions.
Very kind of you, Joe. Thank you.
Anybody else? Philip, would you like to pick up the question from Donna?
Yeah, the problem with drive and instinct is the translation of Freud. He was essentially describing drives and not instincts, but was mistranslated as referring to instinct. And instinct, he did refer to instinct in some of his work, but it wasn't to describe the same phenomena that I've just been describing, but to say that there is something that is built in to all animal behavior that arises in the behavior as if it's already known. I think it's wonderful, actually. The best example, and I can link it to a psychoanalytic concept, so I will, because I think it's an important question. But for me, I went to a school on Dartmoor, which I found very unpleasant, and spent a lot of time sitting around on the moor looking at sheep. Sheep give birth to lambs, and lambs don't just come out and sit there thinking, what the hell is going on here? They instantly get up and start looking for a nipple, and that's an instinct. The human individual child, whatever, I think also has instincts, but they've been given a different term by Bion, actually, who describes a thought before it becomes conscious as a preconception. And some of the most painful experiences that human beings have is the preconception that we will be provided with unconditional love as babies. And I think that's built into us, so therefore it's an instinct, because as we all know, those of us in this room, certainly, I'm sure you all know, that we are born premature. And we're born premature because it would be impossible to give birth to the size of head that would accompany the ability to be able to walk and, if necessary, I suppose, talk. So the baby is utterly, utterly dependent. And therefore, I think it's right to say has an expectation of being looked after unconditionally, loved unconditionally. And I think that is an instinct. So those things are instincts. And the drive is merely another word, it seems to me, for feelings. I think feelings act on us. They're information from the unconscious, but they have the impact on us to require us to process things, and that means they're all drives. Is that all right, Donna?
Yes.
I can't see where she is. Oh.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, thank you for that. It's because it's really interesting. Am I right in thinking, or am I is a drive somehow biology or instinct that has become somehow dovetailed with culture, somehow been washed over by cultural effects? Is that, I suppose I'm still looking for that difference between instinct and drive.
Sorry, I understand now the point of your question. Okay, so that's a really also a very interesting question, because the joyful thing about watching the development of the mind, as I said, is that the infant produces ideas about life, the universe, and everything based on essentially 9 things that infants know at birth, which is why, as I said, you'll find that the same explanations arise across all cultures. In other words, at that point, there's been nothing from the outside world that adds to what is known. But the point that you're making, I think, is that as we grow up, so we get experience of the outside world, and that gives us information, which then becomes part of our store of information, which we use to explain what's going on when continuous experience requires us to make further explanations. So culture, by the time, I mean, when I teach about adolescent development, and I've just had to race through it here, but it's a major difficulty at adolescence, because by the time you essentially kick out the internal parents, because if you think of the Laufer's idea of the task of adolescence being to take possession of the adult sexual body, the first thing that occurs to the adolescent, I'm being a bit sort of flippant here, is, well, who the hell had possession of my body beforehand? Oh God, it's them. And so then they kick us all, the parents, out, and they say, I hate you. And I used to show the wonderful Kevin and what was his name? I can't remember his name now. Anyway, the I hate you thing leaves them at the mercy of other information, and the other information arises from culture. And so without anything guiding them other than their friends and an exploration together, they are at the mercy of culture. And if their friends continue to push the curiosity drive, then those cultural ideas can be questioned. And my observation is that modern adolescents get rid of that process very early on by deciding who they are and what they are. And then, of course, as we know, the AI of the internet, once they've identified in a particular silo, then feeds that silo. And so they're just kept there with constant reinforcement for this particular cultural idea. Does that address what you were wanting, Donna?
Yes, thank you. It's really interesting to think about, because all of this seems to me to be, I mean, when you think of the very strong consumer-driven culture, and which is researching for instant gratification, and that alloyed with that that's seeming individual belief in the right to individual identity. It just, I'm sort of struggling with that idea of when a drive becomes a drive, and whether it's yeah, I'm trying to think here, but it seems to me that when you have adolescence, which is a time of great an uprising, I would have thought, of biological instinct, how that then becomes harnessed through drives to a consumer culture, and that seems to me to be a very powerful mix. So yes, thank you.
I'm just conscious that there are other people with their hands up, and I think we should.
Yes, sorry. Thank you.
Jessica, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, we've got Andy, followed by Siobhan. And you just need to unmute yourself. In the box that you're in, you'll see some dots. Should we take Siobhan while we're waiting for Andy to?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
Siobhan,
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a brief question, but it's probably a potentially long answer. So let's see. I'm really interested to hear, Philip, your thinking. First of all, thank you very much. Your thinking about how to re-engage parents and adolescents into thinking.
Well, the important thing is to find some way of evoking the curiosity drive. That's the short answer. The specific answer will be different for every individual parent and adult. and adolescent for that matter. The thing that often leaves people stuck is the way that they are conned, if you like, by a feeling that to ask questions is to do damage. And so the first thing to be able to do is to take the adult back in time. It's a thing about complaint. I mean, these things are like complaints. Complaints always have the same formula about them, which is you never told me you were going to, right? And weirdly, in spite of that, people address a complaint in terms of the complaint moment. Whereas it's helpful to be able to look back and say, well, what did I say? And so the complaint that I will be traumatized by you having a different belief, and the parent then comes in to protect the child and so on and so forth, is always wrapped up in this idea of this is hurtful to me. And so the challenge of the connection between this is hurtful and I have this belief is something that, if you can address it, might open up inquiry. But if you went from the moment of this is traumatizing me, it's very difficult because you feel that you don't want your little one to be traumatized. But if you go back to where that idea started from, then you've got a chance of being able to release curiosity again, it seems to me.
Thanks. Andy, did you manage to unmute yourself? No. Okay, shall we move? I think we had Lucius.
You look
down.
Unmuted to me, Andy.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Oh, you are. Sorry, Lucius, can you hold?
Okay.
We'll just have Andy first and then we'll
Right,
move to you.
Hopefully, I was just going to say that one of the things that seems curious to me is that my assessment may well be in the wrong sort of bubble, is that the movement to make self-identifying as a gender supreme over biological sex seems to have kind of lost a lot of momentum. And in other words, the world's coming to its senses. But one of the curious things I think about it is that those people who were very much in the grip of the paranoid schizoid position, refusing to open their mind up to other possibilities, actually accused the people on the other side of the argument of exactly the same thing. And that, so I've been told, for example, that my belief that sex is a biological fact is a consequence of my own movement into the paranoid schizoid position, that I refuse to accept other people's points of view. But I mean, I suppose I'm just not really asking a question, just making a comment that it seems as though that state of mind gets projected onto the other side of the argument, which is quite successful very often. But in this case, it just doesn't seem to have worked, because that movement seemed to have lost momentum, or has it? I don't know. Over to you.
Well, I'd love it.
Thanks,
I'd
Andy.
love to think it had, but anyway, go on.
Can Philip, can we, just because we're
Yeah.
coming, well, we're already at 2 o'clock. I know everyone's absolutely engrossed and we've probably got a backlog of questions. I just wondered if we could take 2 more questions or comments, and then we could ask Philip for you to respond to all, if that's all right. So Lucius.
Yes, hi, Philip. Thank you for your thought-provoking presentation. So, given the explosion of trans-identifying individuals over the last decade or so, I wonder if it's possible to attribute this phenomenon to what happened in 2013 when gender identity disorder was reclassified as gender dysphoria in the DSM-5 manual, after intense lobbying by trans activists, resulting in individuals perhaps with underlying medical conditions not receiving the medical care and assistance they truly need. Keen to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Becky, I think you're going to be our last comment.
So I was interested, Philip, in what you said about how we all flip between the kind of fundamentalist state of mind, which is sort of driven by anxiety, and reality being a state of kind of indecision where we're thinking and that curiosity drive is sort of in place and occurring. And I guess, yeah, it's for me, not academic, not really familiar with this territory at all. I thought that was really interesting, and I thought, yeah, is there kind of an optimum balance of those two things, or, you know, is some of what we're seeing where people are flipping into that anxious state and that fundamentalist state of mind too much, or inappropriately or unhelpfully? And yeah, whether I personally, I just sort of found that a really helpful model of a way of thinking about it, and that actually that anybody can, and we probably all exhibit instances where we're being indecisive, where we should just make a decision, or where we're anxious and sort of making a knee-jerk reaction to something and then becoming very entrenched in that position. It's not helpful, and we might not be right, but we're fixating on that. So yeah, just interested to hear further thoughts on that, perhaps.
Yes, do you want me to answer these things?
Yeah,
now?
if you
I
could.
mean, in seconds.
Yeah, if that's possible. I was just thinking there's a sort of link between those questions in the sense that they are touching on the issue of the reality principle and what you started with, which was about beliefs that can be tested against those that perhaps can't be tested against reality. But Philip, yes, if you could, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, it would amaze me if I could as well. So if I can just, I'm going to kind of free associate to all three, because otherwise we'll go way over time. I'll start actually with Lucius. That there is no doubt in my mind that the turning of something which is normal in adolescence into a DSM category, which is what I think happened, was massively problematic. And it's not that there aren't people who have a kind of condition where they get really, really, really messed up by their hatred of their bodies. Of course there are. People do get very, very upset about their bodies. And of course what they do is that they attack their bodies. And that's the sort of conventional old-fashioned experience, was that you'd meet with adolescents who would come to you either having cut themselves or stopped themselves eating or tried to kill themselves. And always when they were killing themselves, if they failed and you put them into analysis, you would discover that they had the fantasy, then they'll be sorry. In other words, it was a psychotic thing where they didn't believe that they would actually die. And I think the problem, certainly with the gender identity disorder unit, was that this idea that all body dysmorphia is some kind of illness meant that they were overwhelmed with an idea that they had to provide treatment instead of simply listening and providing a space for listening. And that's action. And that's the thing that links Becky's question and Andy's question. It seems to me that that it's very easy, and I think it would be, I don't want to come across as critical of people who find themselves pushed into a paranoid schizoid state of mind. It's very, very difficult to resist it when you're confronted with a paranoid schizoid state of mind. Because the paranoid schizoid state of mind comes across as seductively comfortable. It's about certainty. And when you try to reply to certainty with saying, have you ever thought that you may not be right? The response is contempt. And that makes it very difficult for you not to move into a contemptuous position in retaliation. So that the skill of being able to manage that is something which we develop in two ways. One is by the constant move that I think accompanies everyday life between paranoid schizoid and depressive paranoid as it goes on. The knowledge that you can return to it. In other words, that it's beneficial to your life that you have been able to move out of certainty into questioning. That enables you to be able to access the curiosity drive in those most difficult moments. And the thing that always helps. In fact, I think it's essential to move out, and this is Becky's question a bit, to move out of the paranoid schizoid is for somebody to help you to reconnect with your curiosity. And that's what therapy is about. It's what good friends are about. It's about what relationships are about. It's about enabling us to be curious. And of course, the joy of the adult situation is that people can join together, as we have today, in an encounter in which we can be curious about each other. And that provides growth and development.
Thank you, Philip. That was a fantastic way of sort of summarising, really, at a bigger level, and the huge richness of being able to come together and think new thoughts, which this has certainly achieved for me. It's been absolutely gripping, and I wish we could go on for longer. I think we'll have to ask you back. That's the only solution I can come up with. Thank you ever so much. Really appreciate it. You've joined up a lot of disparate areas and made lots of connections for us. Hugely appreciative. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
And this will be published on YouTube shortly, so you can see it again. So thanks, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing many of you, hopefully in a couple of weeks, for the presentation by Lisa Marciano. Thank you, Philip. Philip, would you like to stay on for if you've got 5 minutes?
Sure. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Right, I'm going to stop recording now.
Oh, yes, good idea.